The call about my father came early in the morning, the kind of hour when phones only ring for bad news. Time I reached the hospital, he was already gone. For a few hours, the world became quiet and procedural. Paperwork, phone calls, arrangements. Grief, but held together by tasks that needed to be done. Wasn't until late that afternoon that I remembered I still had to speak to work. My aunt owned the company. Not alone, she was the one everyone deferred to. My father had helped build the business decades ago, but by the time I joined, structure was different. Titles had shifted. Power had consolidated. Still, it was family. Or at least it had always pretended to be. Kept the message simple when I stepped into her office the next morning. "My dad passed yesterday," I said. "Funeral is in 3 days. I'll need 4 days off." For a second she just looked at me. Not shocked, not even surprised, she leaned back in her chair. "We're entering a critical quarter," she said calmly. "You know that." I nodded, waiting for the sentence to finish. It did. "You'll need to choose." I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. "Choose," I repeated. "Career or family," she said, her voice flat. "We all make sacrifices." The room felt strangely quiet after that. There are moments when people reveal something permanent about themselves. Not through anger or shouting, but through how easily they say something that should have been difficult. I realized, standing there, she believed what she had just said was reasonable. I didn't argue. There wasn't a conversation left to have. I nodded once, turned around and walked out. The funeral preparations took most of the next 2 days. Relatives calling, paperwork, the slow, heavy logistics that follow a death. In between those moments, something else started resurfacing in my mind. Conversations with my father from years earlier. He had always been careful when talking about the business. Not paranoid, just deliberate. Never confuse family structure with legal structure. He once told me while we were reviewing some paperwork. They look the same until the day they don't. At the time I thought he was just being cautious. Now I started opening old documents. Years ago, when the company expanded, my father had moved several assets into different arrangements. Some sat inside the company, some didn't. One of them, one I had mostly forgotten about, was technically under my authority, had been placed there as a strategic contribution when I joined leadership. At the time it strengthened the company's balance sheet. Legally, it had never stopped being mine. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, I sat at my laptop. No anger. No speeches, just paperwork. The process itself was straightforward. Notifications, authorization, transfer documentation. By midnight, the asset, valued at just over $3,008 million, was no longer sitting inside the company's financial structure. It hadn't been destroyed or hidden. It had simply been moved somewhere the company could no longer rely on it. Somewhere it belonged to me directly. Funeral came and went in a blur of black suits, folded hands, and the kind of silence that only exists when someone important is gone. Grief does strange things to time. Days stretch, then suddenly collapse. I didn't think about work much during that week. Apparently work had started thinking about me. The finance department noticed the change first. Numbers rarely go unnoticed when they're that large. By the time I returned to the office, the atmosphere had shifted. People were quieter. Conversations paused when I walked through the hallway. My aunt asked me to come to her office. When I stepped inside, the same chair sat behind the same desk, but she didn't lean back this time. "We've noticed a financial adjustment," she said carefully. I nodded. "That asset was placed under my authority years ago. I replied, moved it into a personal holding. Her expression tightened. You understand what that does to our position?
Yes.
I said. There was a long pause. Finally, she asked, why? I thought about answering a dozen different ways. But the real explanation was simple. You asked me to choose? I said quietly. So I separated the two. She didn't respond immediately. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed unsure what to say next. There was no shouting, no threats, just the quiet realization that something structural had changed. The company would survive. The asset hadn't been its foundation, but the assumption behind it, that my loyalty was automatic, was gone. In the months that followed, things became more formal between us, professional, distant. Family dinners stopped including business talk. Business meetings stopped pretending to be family discussions. Dramatic happened, but something important had shifted. My father was still gone. Nothing about the decision changed that loss. What it changed was the weight I carried from that moment in her office. The day she asked me to choose between career and family, she believed she held all the leverage. She didn't realize the choice had already been prepared years earlier. My father had simply left it for me to make when the time came.